right down here, this has always been a little dead-end road area, as you can see right there. It was that way even back in the 60s. But there used to be a pipe that ran under where this road is now, and there was a little trail that went down into the woods here. And there was kind of a gate that kind of would help try to keep you from being able to access the pipe. But you could climb up the little cinder blocks that were around that gate and go up on the pipe. And it was pretty high up. I would say it was probably about 30 feet up or something like that. Be pretty serious if you fell off of it. But we used to walk across that as little kids. I'm sure somebody must have fallen off that thing sooner or later. But we would also come down here to get to the sand pits, which were a big sand and gravel, company on the area, and they would, of course, dig out gravel and sand and stuff like that, and that's located over there. But this is how you would get there. And there'd be trails through these woods. But sometimes we'd come down there, there'd be kids that lived up in this area, this little neighborhood up there. And they would wait, or I don't know, they'd just be hanging out, and they'd see kids from the projects coming down here, and they would be like, "Hey, you kids, stop!" And there's no way you're going to stop. You just, as soon as you hear them, you start running the other way. So we'd run over this way. But I remember coming down here with my brother and one of his friends, and they had, this group of kids, told us to stop. And of course we did, and we ran through the woods. And we kept running. Well, my brother's friend was kind of slow. And anyway, he got left behind. And we weren't sure if the kids caught him or not, but later we went back along the trail to see if he was still there. And we heard him yelling out and crying and stuff. We thought, oh no, what happened to him? And we kept running through the woods till we came upon him, and apparently they had tied him to this tree, and he was crying and stuff. And so we untied him and let him go. But that's the cruel nature of being a kid in this area back then. That'd be even worse than that. There was one time that my mother was going to work. She would work nights, and this gang of, I think they were Hell's Angels members, came over to our house, this biker gang. And I think one of the guys was seeing my oldest sister, and my dad had already left at that point. I think he left in like 66 or 67. And so there was nobody, watching the house. And so I remember me and my brother Tony came out and saw him shooting up heroin in our living room. And then when we went back to bed, of course, couldn't sleep. They were making a bunch of noise and everything. And all of a sudden we hear all this yelling and saw lights flashing and stuff. And apparently one of the neighbors, thank God, had called the cops, and they came over and had arrested these gang members for, obviously doing drugs and shooting up drugs, and I'm sure they had multiple crimes on them. And they took them away, and I remember going to my mom's room the next day, and one of them had tried to go out the window without opening it. And there was blood all over the window where he cut up his arms from breaking the window and trying to climb out it. There was blood going all down the window and down the wall. But, I'm surprised at that point that the cops didn't take us away or something, because normally Child Protective Service would have taken us away. But I don't know if there even was a Child Protective Service back then. This was in the mid-60s. I'm sure there was something like that, but I don't know what. Anyway. Never happened again after that. Right over in this area, there used to be a 7-Eleven, and right near where that light is now, there used to be a Dairy Queen. There was no hill here. You drove in from the road right here, you'd right into the driveway of the 7-Eleven or the Dairy Queen over there. And then what happened is at the end of the property, if you went up behind the store, there was an embankment that went down into the little field that you see right here. So I'm surprised they haven't built something here after all these years. It seemed like they would have put houses or something in there. Anyway, the 7-Eleven store here, remember me and my friend Dennis Babbitt, we went in, and the guy at the counter was busy with somebody, talking to him or ringing him up or something. we decided, we didn't have any money, but we were hungry, so we ended up taking a banana. And I put it in my back pocket, but my back pocket had a hole in it, so it was sticking out of my back pocket when I walked out of the store. I didn't realize that until we sat down in back, right at the edge of the hill, or the little embankment. And I take it out, and we had started to eat the banana. And I gave it to my friend Dennis, and then the clerk from the store came running out and said, "Hey!" And Dennis threw the banana straight up in the air. We ran down the little embankment and across this field. There were other project houses back then, so we just started running through there. Of course, he couldn't follow us because he had to watch the store. So anyway, we didn't get caught, but I just remember, how silly that was, stealing a banana from a 7-Eleven store. There were no sidewalks back then. They just had the road, project houses over there. There was no hill here. It just went straight grass, went up slight incline, and more project houses over there. But no sidewalk. You had to walk along the side of the road. Well, there was like grass and then a little ditch. So you just walked over here along that. And I remember one time, I don't remember if it was Dennis or another friend of mine, we were pretending to throw things at cars just to see what they would do. And some guy got really mad, and he stopped and got out of his car, pulled over on the side of the road, and was going to start chasing us, but we were pretty quick. We ran off. Laughing. It's like we weren't actually throwing anything, so I don't know if he just thought he heard something hit his car or what the deal was, but he was pretty upset. I remember a lot of parents of the kids that I knew seemed like they were kind of tired or temperamental or moody. And I'm thinking now it's because they were probably having to work nights in some cases, or they had to live in the projects, which, to us, I was just home. We didn't think much of it. But for them, I think it was a sign of failure that, the projects was like the lowest income level people around. And in fact, now that I recollect, we'd get some harassment in school from being from the projects, from other kids. They'd make fun of you, or like, "Oh, you're from the projects, you probably can't afford that." But anyway, so it helps explain a lot of, what was going on when I grew up, and the parents and the whole social condition that we were living under back then. So I'm back in my neighborhood. Of course, back then the street was pretty old, had kind of gravel on the side of the road. There were no sidewalks. So I said this was a fairly poor area. But I remember after Halloween one time, we decided to have a parade because we had all these costumes that everyone was wearing for Halloween. We decided we didn't want to stop wearing them, so we thought, well, we'll have a little parade around the neighborhood. There were probably about 15 to 20 of us kids, something like that. And I didn't have a costume because, we couldn't afford to buy one. So I remember digging one out of the garbage from one of the neighbors somewhere. It was like, I think it was a skeleton man, it was a black suit with the bones of a skeleton on it. And then I wore that going around the neighborhood. And I remember Mrs. Rodriguez, she used to like, recording that stuff through pictures. And so she took a picture of all of us. I don't know if she'd still have it or not. She's probably not even alive anymore. I mean, she's probably in her 80s, so maybe she is, maybe she isn't, I don't know. But that's just an example of things you'd find to do to have fun, because of course there was no internet, no games, stuff like that. You just found ways to have fun back then. That house and that tree have been there since the 1960s or even before. And it hasn't changed. That tree was exactly like that. The house looked exactly like that, same red trim and everything. It's just funny how so many things change and yet some things stay the same. As you leave our neighborhood, I remember this street up here, we'd ride our bicycles up it all the time. But these houses, as you can see, they're just regular Rambler style homes, nothing fancy. But for me, I always thought of it as the rich kids. When we left our neighborhood, you entered the neighborhoods of the rich kids, but in reality they were like middle class at best, maybe even like lower middle class. Up there on that little hill across from White Center Heights Elementary that I talked about earlier, there used to be a little store that we would walk up to and buy candy and stuff, and a Chinese man owned it. Like I said, there was a lot of diversity back then because I think, so many people couldn't afford to live in other areas. Thanks for joining me on today's adventure in White Center, the city that I grew up in back from February 14, 1960, when I was born, until I believe July of 1970. And with some interesting times. I'm glad you could join me today. And please come back and join me again for another Adventures of Big A.